Morning, everybody. I'd like to go ahead and start our meeting. Mrs. Weber, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Mallon.
Here.
Mrs. Bitter. Here. Mr. Comer.
Here.
Dr. Stuger. Here. Mrs. Weiss. Here.
And join me in the pledge of allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'd like to start our meeting by reminding everyone and reading our mission and vision statement. And our mission is to create a culture of academic excellence through inclusion and innovative learning opportunities for the whole child. Our vision is to empower all learners to reach their full potential in a globally competitive world. We need a motion for the approval of the agenda, which includes addendum, superintendent agenda 6, 7, 9, 11, personnel consent agenda 1, E, F, 2, L. Mrs. Weber.
Mrs. Weiss. Aye. Dr. Stuger. Aye. Mr. Mallon.
Aye.
Mrs. Bitter. Aye. And Mr. Comer.
Aye. Agenda passes. I need a motion for the approval of the minutes.
Second.
Any comments from the board? Mrs. Weber, please call the roll.
Dr. Stuger. Aye. Mrs. Weiss.
Aye.
Mrs. Bitter. Aye. Mr. Comer.
Aye.
Mr. Mallon.
Aye. Mrs. Weber, would you like to provide us an overview of the program meeting code?
Sure, thank you. Good morning, everyone, and thank you to those of you who are attending in person, and we also welcome those who are attending virtually. To find you who are attending virtually, please note that you can find our agenda on the website at www.sycamoreschools.org. The minutes that we just approved will be posted in that same area if you would like to review those. Today's moderator for public participation requests is Bill Fritz, our Director of Technology. His email address is fritzw@sycamoreschools.org. If you do want to address the board in public participation virtually, please email him and he can help accommodate that request.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Weber. And I do believe we have two in the room that have public participation comments. So we'll start with you, sir. If you want to stand where you are, you can stand up.
Let me go first.
Yep, you can go first. Stand up, state your name, and then you have about 3 minutes.
Okay. My name is James Garrity. My address is 9865 Belford Court in Montgomery. I have 2 children. When I say I'm speaking for my wife too, so please forgive that, focusing on me. I have 2 children that attend school here in the district, both at Mapledale. My son is on the autism spectrum on an IEP, and my daughter is the younger of the 2, and we pay for her to go to the the preschool program. And like most families in this district, we chose to live in Montgomery in this district because of the school district, and we love this district. That's why when I opened up the email yesterday about the Who Day Challenge and found out that the district was going to cancel a day of school because of the Super Bowl on Sunday night, I was appalled and very angry. Canceling in-person learning is different for every student. Some students, it doesn't make a difference. I won't say it doesn't make a difference. I think it makes a difference for all students. But the effect on them isn't as magnified as effect on other students. For someone like my son, who relies on routine, canceling a day of in-person learning, that day's gone. It's lost. There's nothing I can do at home that's going to replicate that. And for a lot of students in the district, I think that's probably similar, canceling those days. Now, I might not have been as upset, and my wife as well, and angry about this if it hadn't been for the fact that 2 weeks ago, the district made a change to the schedule at the request of teachers to cancel 2 days of in-class instruction for teacher collaboration. And maybe there will be something that came from that teacher collaboration that will justify the negative effect on my child from not being in school. There may be some good educational thing that comes from that. I look forward to finding out what that collaboration was and how that might have started something. So now we're at 3 days. And at the end of the message that I watched yesterday, talked about very good chance that the end of the week here is going to be rough, as it was put by the superintendent. And there's a good chance that there'll be a 4th day tomorrow that students might not be in the classroom, and maybe a 5th day. I'd like to put this question to the 3 new board members because I followed the campaign very closely. And one of the things that the 3 of you, and one of you in particular, campaigned on was that you wanted to make sure that the district was serving all students and not ignoring students. I feel very much like what's happening with this challenge is ignoring a very large group of students. That's not to say that it's not a good thing. I think raising money for the charity is great and all of that. But the reality is every day, my son and even my daughter being in preschool isn't there. That's a negative effect on them. Okay, they don't get that back. So I know that in these meetings you don't respond, so I would hope that maybe as a board, you will come out with a statement to the community and the parents to justify why you're taking away a day of instruction for students and how that benefits the most vulnerable students like my son in an educational respect. So that's all I have to say. I appreciate your time, and I've got to run because I have to go take care of my kids. Thank you
very much, Mr. Chair. Ma'am?
Yeah.
Again, state your name and address.
I'm gonna take this off if you don't mind. I can't breathe. My name is Gail Schild. I'm the number 11817 Spiral Pass in Cincinnati. My husband and I have lived in the district for 29 years. We are raising our 2 grandchildren who are presently at Sycamore Junior High School. And I first want to say that I think to a person, people associated, the folks at Sycamore schools are wonderful. They have our kids' best interests at heart. But I do agree with him, by the way. But that isn't why I'm here. I've had a problem for quite a while now with the reliance upon electronics. And I'm not anti-tech, in fact, I use it every day. But, and you might say, well, she's old, no wonder. That's not it either. I recognize in our kids who are, one's above average student and one is just average and has ADHD. So he has some difficulties, but I recognize in them, because they're very chatty kids, that their grammar is terrible. And it's amazing to my husband and I that they go to an award-winning school and can't speak the King's English. It's not appropriate at their age, especially one who is above average and going into the high school, that they don't know proper tenses of verbs, that they end a sentence as, why do we have to do that for? You know, to me, it's like fingernails on a blackboard, and I just don't think that, I don't think it's their fault. I think that they have not been given enough instruction in the basics. There's another problem too, like I make them write thank you notes. They don't know how to make a signature. I know it's been a while since cursive learning has been taken out of schools, but I've had to purchase a book so that they can learn to sign their name. They don't even know why they might even have to make a signature someday. And I think that that's a real deficit, a minor one, but it's a deficit in our kids' learning. But the biggest thing was Caleb had to write a letter. He's making his confirmation in April, and he needed to write a letter to our priest. And it was horrid. And again, he's an above average student. You know, he does well on his math tests and all that kind of stuff. Language arts isn't his strong suit, math is, but it was terrible. He didn't know to to capitalize proper nouns. He used run-on sentences, doesn't know punctuation. I mean, it was appalling. And of course, didn't even know how to write a letter, you know, doesn't know the outline. And again, doesn't know why he should have to. And I think that's a real shortcoming, you know, at the school. I think it's part of the curriculum that needs to be corrected. Our kids got laptops, or the Chromebooks, that is, in 5th grade. I think that's a mistake. Personally, I think that's wrong. I think it just should never have happened. That pen and pencil triggers some things in their brain that creates greater learning for children that age. And I have another objection to the fact that Ethan came home the other day, well, it's been a couple weeks now, and told me, oh, we watched Hidden Figures today in science. And I said, tell me what that has to do with science. And he said, you know, he came up with some lame thing. And I said, no, it was about racism and sexism in NASA in the 1960s. It was a great movie, but why is that being taught in science or shown in science? And then he says, the next week he said, oh, we're watching not Hidden Figures, Hunger Games in language arts. And again, I object to that, showing movies when they should be in class. And I understand that there's been some problems with attendance. Our kids have been out for a couple of weeks because of the COVID protocol, but I purchased some learning online to try to make up for these deficits in their grammar and things like that. That's the kind of stuff that needs to be done instead of showing movies to kids who just eat that up. But I think it's wrong. I don't think that's a good use of our kids' time. And I think it's not serving our kids well. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Moving on to superintendent's agenda, Mr. Lewis, healthy aids update.
The clicker is sleeping this morning, so thank you, Mr. Fritz. Thank you, Mr. Mallett. So, you know, healthy aids, you know, I will say it's encouraging to be able to present data and know that we are on a downhill trend. So I just have a few slides for you today, and Mrs. Spencer is so good that we even have this morning's data in the presentation because she sent it at her normal 6:30 a.m. time frame. So thank you, Mrs. Spencer, for all your work and all your team's work. But so you can see as of this morning, that's we have 4 students in quarantine across the district due to the new contact tracing guidelines and quarantine guidelines that Mrs. Spencer will just briefly talk about in a moment. And then we have 18 positive cases across the district, student cases, and then 5 positive staff cases. And you can see the breakdown, no more than 4 at any building. 2, 3, 3, 4, 3, 2, 1. Almost sounds like a phone number. But at the bottom, the way we've been tracking it is, you know, the number of students combined, total positive and quarantined for a percentage. And we're at 0.4% of our district affected by COVID right now. Out of our 5,675 students, we only have 22 impacted. And then you can see we have 5 staff, 840, that gives us 0.6. So very low numbers. Yesterday, Mr. Fritz is stuck again. Sorry, I think you're admitting people, so.
Yep.
So yesterday was, we had probably a positive case that had some impact, but you can see that yesterday, our combined numbers, we had a few more quarantined in between yesterday and today, and then a couple additional staff positives at the bottom, but that's what caused the minor increase. But this was yesterday morning, it was 19 and 3, and it was 0.3, 0.3. So not much of an increase based on what we've seen. Oops, there we go. As a reminder, here's where we were on 119, which was the last board meeting. We were at 4.7 and 4.2 with 266 students impacted. Obviously, that's pretty significant compared to 22 and 19 or 18, and then 35 staff. And then even before that, when we started to see our, probably the height of our peak,
401 at 7.1%, and then 46 staff at 5.4. And then right after break, we had that, that was kind of the start of the spike when we started to see those numbers increase 186 and 47. So, we kind of went through our surge, and obviously based on what you have seen, we have bottomed out. And I think we were hopeful that that's what the impact would be. And I think all of this to say that it justifies what we did and the steps we took. We have been very clear. We will follow the data and we react and respond to the data. We don't predict data. And I think that has served us well over the 2-year period. What I've said to, and I have community members contacting me, that certainly want us to remove masks, and I have others that think we should keep them on. My response is always the same. We follow the data, we react to the data, and we have done this for a 2-year period. It has served us well because it allows us to really look at our localized school data, not react and respond to everything else that's going on around us. And right now, if I had to react and respond to our current data sitting at 0.3 or 0.4 or 0.6 with staff, it would be hard to justify maintaining a mask mandate following this week. So we're obviously not to the end of the week yet. We have Thursday and Friday to go, but with those low numbers, and the other caveat to that is we certainly made some decisions. If you recall at the beginning of the school year, we made a decision to mask K through 6, but not 7 through 12. And I think our data showed us throughout the first part of the year, the reason we did that was because our upper level students have had the opportunity to be vaccinated and had that additional layer of protection. And our elementary students all the way to green did not. Strangely enough, even masked, we saw the higher numbers in the elementaries and green all throughout the fall. We didn't see any increase in numbers until the most recent Omicron variant really ran through the high school, and certainly we saw the increase in numbers. So, I think it's probably important to always consider the totality of the data, what we've looked at over the course of time. We will look at the rest of the data this week, and we'll be making some decisions by the end of the week. But again, if I had to react and respond to this data right now, we would be moving to an optional environment for masks or facial covering around the district. So, happy to answer any questions about the data before we move on to the quarantine guidelines and any of those.
I have a question. Can you just to talk about the impacts of masking and vaccine on the data that you're presenting to us? I know that you have been learning, and you've been looking at data, but you've also been talking with health professionals, and you've really been diving into this. So can you tell us over these last 2 weeks, how is it? Why is it that those numbers went down? In your opinion?
I don't know that I'm qualified to make an opinion on what caused the data to go down. There's too many variables and factors. I think we believe that reinstating the masks and making sure that we reinstated some distancing requirements. We added additional lunch periods at the high school to increase the spread of our students and the space that they have. What I can clearly state is that just based on the data we looked at, it is obvious that the vaccination works, because when we had unmasked high school and junior high students not spreading very much during the fall. And then we had masked students that were unvaccinated where it was spreading pretty widely at our elementary and green. So, Mrs. Bitter, I find it difficult, to pinpoint exactly what's the nexus that causes the numbers to go down. I don't know that I feel qualified to say that it was masks or it was vaccination. I think certainly the combination of both, and students maintaining our healthy age protocols and making sure that they do things and make good decisions outside of school and don't put themselves in compromised situations. I wouldn't be able to confidently put all those factors together and say that's exactly what did it. Um,
If I could offer a comment.
Please.
I think it's important to understand that Sycamore's data in terms of quarantine and cases, positive cases, is not an anomaly. So we're not lower than community, we're not higher than community. We seem to be in alignment with the community rates. I can confidently say that even when we implemented the mask mandate 7 through 12, that the spread continued for that at least those couple of weeks. You know, those cases numbers were high. So the masking, because the variant was so contagious and you know, spread so quickly, you know, we were seeing the same trends that other districts were seeing, that our community was seeing. So I think it's difficult to say that masks prevented. I think it did, certainly, because we're seeing, you know, that, you know, some of that did happen, but I don't know that we can confidently say that that was the reason, because it was in alignment with community data, other school district data. And we weren't an outlier, either high or low.
And I also wanted you to touch upon the Ohio Department of Health, the new guidance they just gave out.
Can I ask a question before we go to that? My question is, what about the schools where we have 2 preschools and 1 in each building, and then we have Head Start and a 3rd elementary school? Those kids are, it looks like they're going to get approved for vaccination soon. Are we going to hold off to keep those kids, families safe?
I'll look. So most of those, well, I'll let you go ahead and speak about preschool, but I think we've talked about preschool students in general.
Yeah, so preschool preschool students do not fall under the mask to stay, test to play guidelines, because it's not a structured classroom setting. It's play-based, there's stations, kids are moving all around. So the risk is higher there when you're having kids move around in different places, and it's a little more challenging for them to maintain their mask, although they are doing a great job, you know, as 3, 4, and 5-year-olds in those spaces and playing and things like that. So I think that's something that we need to consider, whether or not we continue that or not. But I can say that when we saw the spread, especially at the beginning of the Omicron spread, that even when the kids were masked in preschool, it was spreading to them. They weren't vaccinated, because they're the younger population that aren't eligible. So we need to be careful as we move forward in our protocols for that.
And then one more quick question to follow. Has the Hamilton County Department of Health yet reduced the vaccination rates or?
They have not. It's protected data by the Ohio Hospital Association. We would really like to have that data. I can only speak to that, I would say anecdotally, based on the health professionals that have access to that data. They can't tell you much other than they, I think they believe that we're doing really well in that area. So we have asked a number of times, and I know our Hamilton County Public Health Commissioner is working on getting that data released, because I do think it would tell our story. I believe strongly, based on what we have heard from them, that our numbers would mirror what we're seeing in our adult population. But I don't have any fact-based way to prove that. Right? So that's why we haven't brought it up.
Mr. Lewis and Mrs. Spencer mentioned the layers of protocols. What protocols would stay in effect if masks were optional, or what are the other protocols that are in place?
I think our team, we've got some other, we still have an enhanced cleaning in place. There's still, unless it has expired, the bus mandate of masks on buses still remains. So that's not something that I can change or that we can change as a district. We still have additional spacing in some of the most of the classrooms and at lunchtime where appropriate. So, those things will continue to stay as of right now. I will say I've had high school students reach out about the detriment of the 4-lunch system, and advocating to go back to the 2-lunch system. So, we'll consider that as part of our discussion, but our team, once we make that decision, will have some additional conversations about that. And then we're still waiting on guidance.
we're still actually waiting on guidance from Hamilton County Public Health for the most recent updates. And I think it's important for us to share that piece with you. Just, obviously we went through a change in our quarantine guidelines, but we're also still awaiting some guidance. So I'll let Mrs. Spencer just.
Mr. Lewis, if there is a change made, it doesn't mean that we're not going to continue tracking data and we're not going to see impact. And that, things could change if we see changes in data as well. We will continue to do everything we've done in the past 2 years to track the data, to see where we stand, and we'll continue to make decisions based on what we're seeing in our laws.
I wish we didn't have to, Mr. Ballard. That's a great point. But yes, we're going to continue on with. I think that's one of the frustrations that myself and our team feel about this process is people will come and talk with us about our protocols or what we've done. And it always starts with, you guys have done an amazing job for the last 2 years. You've really stayed on top of this. I think the district's done an amazing job. And then there's a but, and then they tell us what we think we should do. And I always struggle with that because if we've done such a great job, let us use our process that has worked. And it doesn't mean that we can't make a mistake. It happens. We could make a mistake, but overall, we have a lot of people that are supporting us and helping us and guiding us. We look at data every single day. We have never fallen down on that part of the job, and we're not going to, because what's at the core of what we do? It's our students. That's what we think about. We don't think about the politics. We don't think about the opinions coming from outside. I don't think about the emails that I get. I think about the kids that I have to look at every day and make sure that we're reviewing the data that makes sense. Based on what you see, it would be very hard for me to look at our student body and keep saying, I'm making the right decision based on numbers, because the percentages just aren't there. And that's not to say that if the percentages go way back up, we made that call. That was one of the toughest calls we've ever had to make. I did not want to have to put masks back on our high school students. I don't think they wanted them back on. But the data showed that we needed to do it to stop the spread and try to get it back under control. And now we're here. And so I can appreciate, I want the community to know clearly, and our staff to know, and our students to know, we will continue to look at that data. We will make sure that we're making good decisions based on what we see and not on all the other pieces that can come into those factors. So.
Mr. Lewis, I have one follow-up to that. But there was a year, the masking policy for 1 year, for the first year of the pandemic, that was mandated by the Ohio Department of Health and the governor, right? So really, the week-to-week part where we're looking at data and making a decision based on masking only has been going on for 6 months, right? Since August when you.
That's incorrect. We've been looking at data for.
I know you've been looking at data, but looking at data to make the masking decision.
The 2-year period, we've had to look at data to make decisions, not just to mask and no mask. It's to close school, to open school, to go remote, to go virtual.
Sure.
To just all those decisions. Again, that's been a 2-year process. And we didn't get any guidance from people at the state most of the time. They did a mandate one time and then they left us hanging for the last year. So
in this particular issue, we're talking about masking though, right? We're talking about whether the kids are going to go in mask next week.
Correct.
Starting. So that's what I'm referring to. I understand that we look at the data, but I just want to clarify that the actual masking policy has been in place. We're looking at data on a week-to-week basis since August of this year.
The week-to-week started well before August, but your point is,
Just regarding that.
we've been making decisions since the board voted on a policy for me to make the decisions for masking. Yes, since August, but man, we look at data well before August, so that was my only point. So, Mrs. Spencer, if you could just quickly, what changed with the quarantine guidelines and then what we're waiting on, I think that'll kind of bring us to closure on this topic.
So right after the winter break, January 3rd, the new quarantine guidelines were implemented, and the intent was good. The intent is to make sure that we're looking at keeping kids in school as much as possible. And so the reduction in the quarantine and isolation timeframe was made from 10 days to 5 days with some caveats. So if an individual is positive, they would self-isolate for at least 5 days. And if they are symptom-free, They can return on day 6, but they will have to mask. They have to wear a mask for the next 5 days. Same with the quarantine. If you are identified as a close contact and would have been required to quarantine, if you're vaccinated, you certainly don't have to quarantine as long as that you're not symptomatic. If you were required to quarantine previously because your vaccination status is not up to date or you do not have a vaccine, the 10-day recommendation can be reduced to 5 days, again, as long as that individual is symptom-free, and it's highly recommended that they test at day 5 to ensure. It's not required, but it's recommended. And we have, Mr. Foster has done a great job of maintaining our supply of test kits from the state, who has provided that for us. So we provide those tests if parents would like that. They aren't PCR tests, they are rapid tests, but certainly it's a test nonetheless. And some families do both. They might go get a rapid test and then they'll get a PCR just to be safe. So again, the intent was good in terms of reducing the number of days that individuals needed to be out. Mid-January, around the 18th, the health commissioner, the Ohio Department of Health, indicated that the universal contact tracing would not necessarily need to be continued in school. That's a little confusing. We are still awaiting guidance, which is supposed to come out February 4th, which is Friday, from the Hamilton County Public Health Department for schools in terms of interpreting this information. So
What was the justification for that? You know, they said, what was the justification for taking away that close quarantine, the close contacts?
because the spread was it's so rapid, it's assumed that everybody is a close contact at this point because it is so widespread in the communities that the contact tracing is no longer required. However, what's still required is mask to stay, test to play. That still requires us to contact trace and identify close contacts. Another component of their guidance said that districts no longer have to report those close contacts every day. We were reporting close contacts and positive cases every single day to the Hamilton County Health Department. So they have reduced, or they will reduce starting February 4th, the requirement for us to report positive cases from daily to weekly, although we still need to track those daily and document those. So that's not going to be an issue at all. The contact tracing, we don't have to report that to the health department, but we are still monitoring that in every single building. We're identifying the close contacts the same way we have. We're looking at the new guidance in terms of quarantine and implementing those pieces to make sure that we're understanding, who they were a close contact to. If we see a spread in a classroom, then we need to react to that. In the past, we have had to shut down a classroom. We did that in preschool. We did that in one of our school-age classrooms earlier this year as well. So again, reacting to that data and making sure that we are aware of what does that look like in terms of the spread of COVID-19. So those are in terms of updates. That's where we're at. So it reduces the burden of us reporting every day, although we're still tracking every day. So I will just share with you, it's not a significant decrease just because, we already track it every day. So it's a click of the button sharing the information with the health department. But it is nice to be able to not have to manage all of that for, one piling onto one spreadsheet for the district. And we can maintain those for each building so that the administration and the nursing staff in each building are aware of the close contacts in every single building.
So I have a quick follow-up question on this also. If we have a child who's out positive and needs to wear a mask for 5 days after they come back, are teachers going to be aware of the child's COVID status and testing them so that they would know that child is supposed to have those 5 days or whatever? Say if they come back, it's, they, whatever, 1 and 2 or Saturday and Sunday, and leaving 3 days of masking. Are teachers going to be aware of this? Because I think
yes, they're aware. They will be made aware that these students need to mask for this long. Whether or not that we don't share with them, it's because of quarantine or COVID positive status, but we just say that, these students need to maintain masking for this number of days.
So, obviously for, just to round out that item, we're busy continuing to look at key information and continue to provide updates. If we move into that optional status and the data doesn't change drastically, we may reduce our communication, because obviously it was a hot button topic for the last month with the high numbers. So certainly it was something that was on the minds of our families, but if the data stays very low and doesn't seem to have a trend, and the health commissioners that I talked to tend to believe that that's what we're going to see. And if you remember last January, we kind of went through the same thing. It just kind of bottomed out, and then it kind of stayed low all through summer. And then of course what happened, we came back to school and we saw an increase. So I hope it doesn't come back in the fall and we see low numbers for the rest of the time. But we'll continue to look at that data, and we'll make updates to you and also the community as the information is available.
The rest of this will still be updating the dashboard for this school year.
Yep.
Mr. Lewis, I just want to say a thank you to the team that does all of this work every day. I know that Mrs. Spencer and the nursing staff and so many people at the schools are doing this work very diligently, very professionally, and I, for one, really appreciate the attention to detail and the care that they're providing for our students. I also appreciate the consistency that you have had for all parties to say the data that we have within our district. I think that's been a positive approach.
Appreciate you saying that. I know our team appreciates the sentiment. So.
Okay, thank you very much. Our second topic on Superintendent's agenda is master facility. Mr. Lowell and Mrs. Weber. All yours.
Morning. We are going to today, number one, really circle back to our discussion from the last board meeting regarding continuing efforts that we need to move forward with the multi-use stadium project at the high school, as well as campus parking. But before that, we don't have a lot of the normal slides that we have updating all of the buildings, but I believe we're still on budget, keeping it on track. So
Yes, as of
If I'm
8:07
wrong,
a.m. today.
I am not aware that
Time on
anything has
budget.
gone off the rails in the last 2 weeks, so that's all right. So Mr. Fritz, if you could go forward. Okay, so let's kick it off with just an update on the multi-use stadium. And remember, what we are trying to do is keep this project on track so that we can have our stadium open for next fall. So we're continuing to bring those approvals forward to you that we need to have completed so that we can keep this on track within those budget parameters that we talked about previously. So I think it might be helpful just to go back to the November 17th board meeting, where we had our last kind of detailed presentation on the different phases of the multi-use stadium project, and continue to talk about what dollars are available in the bond issue, as well as private funding. So at that point in time, the board authorized $5.5 million based on having $2.5 million for the bond issue and $3 million to date in private funding at that point to move forward with phase one of the athletic project. Okay, so that was the work that we did a couple of months ago. And Mr. Fritz, you can go to the next slide. Okay. With that, we also noted that we were on our way to doing some of the next phases of an Always an Aviator campaign. And since then, we've raised about an additional $250,000 in either contribution, which would be cash at hand, or pledges from a lot of individuals within our community. We've also, and we approved this at our last meeting, a contract that basically gives us a $200,000 payment in kind by providing the scoreboard so that we don't have to absorb that cost within the total project cost. So all in all, about $450,000 from either contributions, pledges, or the contract to take part of that cost out of phase one.
Mrs. Weber, can I just ask, oh, there.
Sure.
Just ask a quick question about this. So when I saw these slides come through last night, I had questions, but I thought I would just save them for this morning. Is the additional $250,000 in pledges specifically for the multi-use stadium, or is that just for the always an aviator? It could be a lane in
Yeah,
the pool.
these 250,000, because and thank you for asking that question, because we've also gotten considerable donations for the natatorium, because the Seeger family had an additional challenge that went with that. And we are seeing also some contributions that are coming in for baseball as well.
Okay, so that is definitely just for
So
the.
these are for the stadium.
Okay,
Great, the additional $250,000. And thank you for asking that clarifying question, because at some point in time, we'll have to come back with the same kind of information for the natatorium too, because that's one of the next things on our list. Okay, next slide. Okay, so just again, going back to what we had looked at back in November, the phase one budget is 5.9 million, and that includes the site development, utilities to the site, some of the concrete work, and we'll talk about that in a little bit when we go back and look at, and the concession stands and restrooms. What we were asking you today is to approve, and it's really GMP 3 overall, but it's broken into 2 parts. One is for the work that is attributed to the stadium piece, and then we'll talk in a little bit about the piece that is for the campus parking. But overall, to date, at this point in time, if this GMP 3A is approved, which is really site work, we've already approved about 1.3 million for the grandstands, bleachers for both home visitors and a new student section, which we think will be really, really well received based on how our HK enjoyed our games last year. We're at about 3.2 million out of the 5.9 million, so a little over 54%. Okay, Mr. President. Okay, so again, just looking at the site plan, phase one is the turf field. It's all of the site development around that. The yellow are the bleachers or grandstand area, and the blue box is the concession restroom area. So I don't know if you have any additional information at this point. Nope. Mr. Lovell, share with that. So just to give you a reminder of what we are looking at within phase one of the project. Okay. Next slide, Mr. Brooks. Going back again to how that 5.9 million is broken down. If you approve this today, we'll have the site work done. We are intending to bring contracts because we're utilizing the state term purchasing process for the turf and the stadium lights. We've already approved the grandstand. The scoreboard has been secured through the contract that we approved last time. And then we'll also be bringing what will be, I think, GMP 3C, who knows, we'll figure out the numbering, but that will basically involve the restroom concessions. And then I think there's still a little bit of concrete work that we're going to go forward with that. So the stadium, the turf, we intend to bring those contracts to our February 16th meeting, and we'll continue to gauge that versus the overall budget for phase one. And I believe I just saw yesterday that the restroom and concessions are probably going to be the March morning.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
So is this different than the 5.5 million that we approved in November, or is this a modification of the 5.5 to be 5.9?
What we will be requesting, and I guess my question would be, in November, we approved 5.5 million because that's what we had from bond issue and private funding. So at some point in time, and maybe we do it next meeting, because we can do that, but we can change that parameter if you want. But this 5.9 is 5.5 that had been approved before, plus the additional private funding that was.
So when we approved it before, it was without restrooms and concessions. So we were approving, right, the 5.5, and we said if we can't build the restroom and concessions, we were gonna use the old ones until we raised enough private funds. So now we've secured the private funds to complete the initial work.
Yeah, and I remember it a little bit differently. I mean, what I remember was you have 5.5 million to spend. If you can get the concessions, great, but we knew that we probably would not. So we knew that we had a cap on what we could bid and bring contracts and approvals to you for based on those two.
But this is where, if I can summarize what I think's changed since November, we have an additional $200,000 in private funding on top. In November, we had 5.5.
Right.
Now we have effectively 5.7.
Yeah.
And additionally, the scoreboard, which we had factored into the 5.9 cost, is now going to be no cost, if you will, right? So either you charge it at 200 and take the 200 as a credit, say it's 5.9, or you say it's 5.7, we have dollars in hand. I don't know how to best think about that, but effectively, we can now say we have enough private funding to cover all of the phase one estimate, which we did not have in place in November, if I understand this correctly.
Yes, that's where we are. That's helpful. And thank you for explaining that, because we've gone back and forth a couple times about the scoreboard and what the impact on the overall budget is, because, you know, people would like to think, oh, we've got the scoreboard, so now we have 5.9 spent on that thing. We really don't. So thank you for clarifying that. Okay, so that's where we are. And I guess, given that resolution that was approved in November, that's probably something we'll want to bring back at a future meeting to basically change the scope of this. So thank you for that reminder. Okay. Next slide. Okay. So again, GMP 3A is the early site package for the multi-use stadium. It's the earthwork, which, you know, think about that right now. It's a flat space, but it's still removing dirt, getting it prepped for the turf field, putting utilities to that space, because right now there are none. A lot of concrete work for sidewalks, things such as that for ingress and egress. And the cost of that is at about $1.9 million. That's part of the GMP we're going to ask you to approve. Okay. On to the next slide, just an update. There's the visual of the parking overview for the campus area, showing you the impact of moving that student parking from west side of the campus over to the east side of the campus. So I believe we've had some discussions about how some of the safety aspects that will need to be implemented within this, as well as just kind of thinking about how the overall flow of the campus will work too. So that's hopefully that just kind of gives you a visual of what we're looking at. Okay, Mr. Fritz, next slide. Okay, so the campus parking is included as GMP 3B. And again, and this is, and the $1 million cost is almost all of the work that's associated with that, with the parking lot. So the site work, again, flattening out that space, it will be installing all of the asphalt. I think the one thing that we still need to come back with is some lighting.
Electrical and lighting. So because it's campus lighting, it'll be a part of that bigger, what we would consider a 3C package. Just because they weren't able to bust that out, because we have to understand and identify where the electrical would land and what kind of lights are going to put in that space.
So we're still anticipating that's going to be at about the $1.2 million cost that we have looked at before. But as far as the portion of the GMP, it's about $1 million.
But the lighting for the parking is something that they anticipated, right? That's not another
Yes,
surprise. Right?
Yes, it's really just the way the work was scoped out. And they were put together, the multi-use stadium, because it's the same kind of contractors. The lighting isn't the same type of contractor, so they will add that to the next GMP.
So GMP 3C, would that be an additional $200,000 then over this? Yes, okay, just asking.
That,
Yeah,
plus,
so the
plus
total-
my guess is there will probably be other costs associated with the stadium as well. So there will be, I'm anticipating it'll be lighting for this, as well as the concession stand, restroom, all of those will likely be within the next year.
But that next GMP still remains within the
5 points.
stadium portion, is still within the 5 point.
Right,
It's not
well, you'll
additional.
probably see it being very similar, you know, what's associated with parking, what's associated with.
Yeah, I think that's probably where I kind of had the disconnect last night at, I don't know, 10 o'clock or whatever. Was when we start combining the parking piece into the stadium, I need to see those separate because I do think of them as separate because the parking is not, in my mind, related to the stadium and athletics. It is a necessity, as Mr. Comerford said at the last meeting, it's a necessity for our students and our staff. So if all we can keep that separate, that would be really helpful.
Yeah,
For me anyway.
absolutely. And we've been working really hard with HGC, the contractor, and SHP to get them to help us break those costs separated because it's bid through SHP and because it's the one contractor, a lot of the work, there's savings in doing the site development work together because of having the equipment out there and having the contractors on site. So we're splitting it the best we can. Things like lighting, electric, and we had many, probably hours of conversation around just that. And it was to the point of saying, we just can't separate those things just because of how they're going to be laid out on the site. But yes, we are working
Because
hard.
I mean, just from a board member's perspective, the commitment that we made to the community of what we would raise, what we would take from the bond to the stadium and then what would be privately raised, we have to keep that commitment. So we can't start mixing things together. I understand where you're coming from in terms of the equipment. We want to be able to take advantage of those situations. I get that, but we need to make sure that we're looking at this cost
For
separately.
you, it's line items.
Right.
Keep them separate. For you, it's projects.
Right.
Often goes.
And so what they have been able to do is, for example, with the cost that came, that you saw as the cost sheet that had it separated into two things, like some of it was really easy. The only asphalt work that was happening was with the parking lot. The other, they could do it basically by square footage.
Yep.
You know, with what is being done in those two different items. The concrete work, I think, was primarily just for the stadium, you know, so, and then I think all of the underlying costs were kind of based on a percentage cost, based on the cost.
That's
of the
fine,
stadium.
yeah.
So we're continuing to say, as much as we can, you know, bid these out so that the work can benefit from having the, you know, the
Sure.
single contractors do that. But it's really important for us to be able to allocate those costs accurately to the two projects. So we're continuing with that mindset to be able to show that to the community. So hopefully that's helpful to
That's
you.
very helpful.
That's what we did with the cost sheet that we provided to you, just to show the breakdown between the two projects.
I found that cost sheet extremely helpful. I'm not sure if everyone, that sheet that you have right there, I'm not sure everyone may have seen
Now,
that.
let's get this. One of the things that Mr. Comerford asked for was just kind of an overall view. And normally this report comes with the monthly financial report. And I will tell you that this was just, worked on this yesterday and tried to get it up to date as of January 31. So not all of the revenue is reflected yet in terms of actual revenue because we haven't closed for February yet. But what you can see is on the budget expenditures areas is how the changes to some of the funding sources has been reflected in the budget. And where we are to this point overall in the project by project and the district MMP as a whole. So one of the changes that I made is based on our conversation is a reallocation from roof replacement up to the high school for the campus parking project. So that change has been made on this report. We have increased based on the private funding pledges and obligations, changed the stadium athletics to really just reflect the phase one part of the budget at 5.9 million. And you can see at this point, we've obligated about 54% of that budget. Overall, we're at about 84% of total dollars allocated. We're really close on Sims. Green is, I think the one item left there is furnishings. The junior high is furnishings and contingency. The high school, and I'm trying to remember, Mr. Lovell, when we are going to have GMP 4 for the high school, which is the interior athletics, but I think that's due in March.
Yeah, it should be hitting March.
Okay, so there's still one more big phase inside the building at the high school, plus a lot of their furnishings is yet to be determined. Transportation, that's in the design phase right now. Once we get through a board of site arrangement meeting next, on
Valentine's Day we get to. Yeah, yeah. It's been Valentine's Day with transportation.
Yeah. Okay, but overall, we're at about 84% and have, we still have our district-wide contingency of about $600,000. And we fully expect that will be needed for growth. So.
What I really appreciate about this is the breakdown between the high school and the stadium and athletics. And I think Mr. Lewis said it properly, that the line item expenditures going against the right line items, and we can see how we're trending against each line item is super helpful. Transparency for us to understand. So thank you for that.
So I guess, are there any other questions at this point about just how we would proceed? You'll see item number 6 is approval of the overall GMP, and we integrated the two different projects in terms of cost. But it really does approve the overall amendment to the contract with HGC. So, the construction. All right.
Thank you very much. I need a motion for the approval of the change order for EH Green Intermediate Construction.
Second.
Any comments? Robert, please call roll.
Mrs. Weiss.
Aye.
Mr. Comer.
Aye.
Dr. Stever. Aye. Mr. Mallon.
Aye.
Mrs. Bitter.
Aye.
Motion passes. I need a motion for the change order for Sycamore Junior High Construction.
Second.
Questions from the board? Weber?
Mrs. Weiss.
Aye.
Dr. Stever.
Aye.
Mr. Mallon.
Aye.
Mrs. Bitter.
Aye.
And Mr. Comer.
Aye.
Motion passes. I need a motion for the approval of change order Sycamore High School renovation project GMP number 2.
So moved.
Second.
Questions from the board? Mrs. Weber?
Mr. Comer.
Aye.
Dr. Stever.
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss.
Aye.
Mr. Mallon.
Aye.
Mrs. Bitter.
Aye.
Motion passes. I need a motion for the approval of number 3 CMR agreement HGC construction Sycamore High School renovation.
So moved.
Second.
Questions? Mrs. Weber, please call the roll.
Mr. Comer.
Aye.
Mrs. Bitter.
Aye.
Mr. Mallon.
Aye.
Dr. Stever.
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss.
Aye.
Motion passes. I need a motion for the authorization to advertise for bids for bus purchase.
Second.
Any questions or any comments, Mr. Roll?
Sure. So part of our capital improvement expenditures each year is the purchase of 4 buses. It's part of our kind of quote unquote master plan to ensure that our buses are up to date. As you know, there's a balance between maintaining the fleet, purchasing new ones, and trying to spread that cost out. The exciting part this year is part of the new funding formula for the state of Ohio allowed us to identify buses that we needed to remove from the fleet based on age and mileage. That gives us the ability to get a quote unquote, I guess it's not a grant, it's just funding from the state through that formula. So we were awarded close to $130,000 for replacement of buses. Just so you know, an average cost of bus is right around $100,000. So this is an exciting opportunity for us to be able to recoup some of those capital expenditures we would have been putting forward to buy the buses. This gives us the ability to move forward with putting the bids out.
And hopefully that funding source will stay in the budget, I think, at least for the next 2 years. It's
Cross our fingers. Yeah.
Any questions?
Dr. Stever? Aye. Mrs. Bitter? Aye. Mr. Comer?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Mr. Ballard?
Aye. Motion passes. I need a motion for the contract. So. Questions for the board?
Mr. Comer?
Aye.
Dr. Stever? Aye. Mrs. Bitter? Aye. Mrs. Weiss? Aye. Mr. Ballard?
Motion passes. I need a motion for approval for the contract with SETI RNP Support LLC.
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Fallon, if you don't mind, I'll just have Mrs. Spencer just make a couple comments on this item.
So this is a contract for, to support a student who has some pretty significant needs and is homebound, not because of COVID, but because of his significant needs. This individual, a student needs to have 24/7 support surrounding him, 2 people at a time, because of the significance of his self-interest and aggressive behaviors. So it has been quite a challenge to secure providers to provide homebound instruction, as we're required as a district to instruct them. And so we are contracting with an individual who has provided support to him in the past through this contract.
I have a few questions or concerns about RPM or rapid prompting method. And I know Mrs. Spencer, our board has talked about this in the past because we have had contracts with the other providers in the past for this service. And I'm hoping that you can maybe provide the board in entirety with kind of what the process is. But, you know, I did a little bit more research on this when I saw this come through on the agenda, because rapid prompting method is, I think, at best controversial. And according to the American Speech Language Hearing Association, excuse me, my voice this morning, their position statement on rapid prompting method is, it is the position of the American Speech Language Hearing Association that the use of the rapid prompting method, RPM, is not recommended because of prompt dependency and the lack of scientific validity. Furthermore, information obtained through the use of RPM should not be assumed to be the communication of the person with a disability. The paper goes on to say that RPM bears considerable similarities with facilitated communication, which is also called assisted typing, facilitated communication training and supported typing. And FC, facilitated communication, is a pseudoscientific technique that has been discredited, disproven, and found harmful. And so as I went through this, I'm wondering as a district why we're actually recommending this. According to our policy IAA on instructional objectives, part of our policy says curriculum development, articulation, evaluation, and revision will reflect both national and Ohio academic content area standards for all students and be grounded in research-based best instructional practice and materials. So as a board member, I look at this and I'm wondering why we're recommending this, because the data and professional organizations are stating that this is not a proven method. If anything, RPM, they're saying RPM avoids peer review and discourages scientific research. My understanding is that this to be authorized as an RPM provider, you have to get instruction from one person who developed this for her son, who lives in Texas. And I'm wondering how we as a district are actually vetting this and why are we recommending this?
So I think it's important to understand that this contract is not to provide rapid prompting method support for communication. This is really an instructional strategy that is being utilized for part of this student's academics in terms of the output from this young man. He is not being prompted through given paper choices, things like that, as that he is at a point where he is able to communicate independently using an iPad, not assisted by a letterboard that somebody's holding or that somebody is prompting him through the next stages. This contract, and I did speak with the provider, and we changed the language on the description of services to help further support that it is an instructional strategy and not a communication methodology. This young man receives speech and language services that we provide, and rapid prompting method is not utilized for his communication. This is a component of his instruction that this provider is providing for his academics.
Okay, so just to be clear then, RPM is not, this contract with Luzzati RPM support, the $4,000 is not for RPM.
That's correct. This child's IEP does not include RPM. It simply, right at this point, is the lack of being able to find a provider that is able or willing to work with this young man because of the significance of his behaviors. And this individual does have a relationship with this child, and so is able to provide those services. But the services, RPM is not included in this child's IEP services.
Great, thank you so much for the clarification. I appreciate it. Thank you.
I have a follow-up question about this subject, because I didn't quite understand this. So when we provide services, therapeutic services for any child in our district, do we have a standard vetting system that we go through, whether it's for a child with a disability or a child that doesn't have a disability? Like, do we look at every single curriculum in our district to make sure it's research-based and it's backed behind every single educational program? Do we do that for every group, or do we just do it for students with disabilities, or do we do it at all?
No, that is something that we do, and typically we're looking at when we're contracting for services, certifications, methodologies, things like that. But yes, we do go through a process to make sure that best practices are being utilized. And if that's in question, then we communicate with those providers and make sure, or if they're our own staff, then we look at what additional training we might need to provide, or looking at alternative methods to provide the same.
I guess the reason that I asked, I just want to know, is the same level of scrutiny, in the disability space, obviously. I know a lot about that. There's just hasn't been a lot of research done at all, because it's such a novel field. I mean, it's an emerging field. It's something that research is being done all the time. So my question is, if a provider does something, or not even just a therapist, a teacher, in a way that differentiates to try to get output, right? Like point at the answer you believe is the correct answer. I mean, that could technically be rapid prompting, right? Like that actually would be, or spell your name using, these cues, or touching something. Isn't that RPM?
I disagree that it would
I mean, I'm
be
just
rapid
asking, like,
prompting method, yes.
are we getting into like a very gray area of differentiation if we start? I just want to know what is our policy? So you just look at every single therapy that's ever given to any person with a disability. And
It's
you just
not
make
necessarily therapy, it's the strategies that are utilized, it's the programming, maybe it's research-based programming that's utilized. But I think it, when you have national organizations that some of our staff are under the standards associated with their profession, that's when we really look at, okay, how is this being utilized? How is it being perceived by families? How is it being perceived by our staff in terms of utilization of this, especially this methodology, because it is so controversial and it is not research-based.
And then the same, I guess the reason I'm asking is because we have other emerging mental health programs that we're also trying to obviously get into our school too. I just want to know generally what the process.
I was just gonna suggest, Mr. Ballard, this is getting kind of off the topic of the contract. If we want to have a different discussion or, bring back a presentation down the road, like we can get some information from the board of what your interest might be around some of our special programs or some of our research-based things that we need to look at, and we can come back and have maybe a work session more about some of those topics instead of on this.
That's
this
a
item.
great idea. I appreciate that.
Okay. Any additional questions? Mrs. Weber, Ms. Conger?
Mr. Comer.
Aye.
Mrs. Witter. Aye. Dr. Stuker. Aye. Mrs. Weiss.
Aye.
Mr. Ballard.
Aye. So I need a motion for approval of the higher high school athletic association.
So moved.
Mrs. Weiss.
Aye.
Dr. Stuker. Aye. Mr. Ballard.
Aye.
Mrs. Bitter. Aye. And Mr. Comer.
Aye.
Motion passes. Mr. Miller?
Just a couple of quick things, because there's so much good stuff going on that I would be remiss to not mention a couple of the things. So our high school orchestra and choir students, over 100+ students participated in the OMEA Solo and Ensemble Festival, which is basically their talent, showcasing their talents with their voices and obviously their skill on instruments. So 98% of our performances got a superior or excellent rate.
No, that's fantastic.
That is awesome. And then as part of the theater team,
I'm not seeing.
I see what you did there.
that is a very, very large stretch.
I have a picture of him on opening night.
So my fellow theater aviators, 5 of them are now semifinalists for the Overture Awards, which basically they compete in a theater competition across Greater Cincinnati, and for the 3rd consecutive year, our high school leads the number of semifinalists. So those semifinalists, Claire Dillon is a semifinalist in theater, Kelly Donovan, same semifinalist in theater, Peyton Hines, which, by the way, some of these fellow cast members were so gracious and nice behind. They were keeping me calm backstage. Peyton was one of those people that constantly talked to me, and I'm like, I am so thankful somebody's talking to me, because it's nerve-wracking. They do it every night and have numerous lines, and I can barely remember 7. So Morgan Robinson, a semifinalist in theater, and then I'm gonna probably Sabine Hume, Overture Award semifinals and vocal performance. And I will tell you, if you got to see The Drowsy Chaperone, many people came up to me, and I can guarantee it was not because of my performance, said it was the best performance they have seen. And that's saying a lot, because they put on a lot of great performances, but I would tend to agree it's just a showcase of the talent we have here. And I will encourage you, Mr. Waffle does a fantastic job of selecting shows based on the talent of the students. And I will tell you, get ready, because Legally Blonde will showcase the talents, especially the female vocal talent and dancing talent that we have in this district. So get ready for that. And then finally, last and certainly not least, our boys basketball team yesterday won a nail biter 44-43. And it's a huge accomplishment, not only because they were down 17-5 at one point. That means they only gave up 26 the rest of the way, and that was after the first quarter, I believe. But the crowd, the Ave Cave, it was absolutely an electric environment. I mean, I have never seen the gym so full in 10 years of being in this district. So kudos to the high school students and the staff. There were staff members from every building at that game supporting our great students. And so hats off to everyone that was there and to our community. There wasn't a seat. I was like kind of huddled behind like Mr. Bader trying to see the game, and our student section were standing. It was so packed they had to stand right behind the players. So it was a lot of fun. So we are, I believe, tied for first place, if not in first place because of tiebreakers, but we'll hopefully finish the year in first place and head into the tournament on a high note, so. But that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Need a motion for the approval of the personnel consent agenda, which includes addendum 1, B, and F, 2, L, and M.
So moved.
Second.
Whoever please call the roll.
Mr. Comer?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Mr. Balance?
Aye.
Spitter? Aye. Dr. Steve?
Aye.
Motion passes. Other Board of Education business, Mrs. Bitter is going to discuss her and Dr. Stever's attendance at High School Board Association new board member.
We, Dr. Seeger and I both attended a new board training earlier, actually it was in early January. It was with the Ohio School Board Association. The Ohio School Board Association is just a non-governmental entity that represents almost every, most of the school districts in the state of Ohio. I know that probably every board member here has gone to the new board training, so it was very appreciated. We appreciated that. It was a Southwest Ohio training. It was 2 days, 2 full days on the weekend. It was just excellent. It was very comprehensive. We went to, they talked about the things that that they do as an entity. They really do a lot of trainings, was one of the things they do. But they also do some lobbying on behalf of their members. They look at legislation, look at policy. I know that Mrs. Weber is our policy liaison, so we all get information about the policies coming down the pike, but then we are able to, as a district, look at those policies, get some information from the Ohio School Board Association and make decisions based on those, hopefully. The topics that they covered, which probably you all know, but I am reporting it to you, governance, general governance for the board, that's our role, state law, school district policies, just our roles and responsibilities as board members, our ethical duties. They also covered things about school finance, making sure that we are accountable to the public, taxpayers. This was probably a little bit different than the ones that you've gone to in the past because they covered things about COVID funding that are, that's available from the state and federal government to our district. And then they just, again, they're big subjects that they kind of hone in on are the legislative issues that are going on. And one of the big ones, and I know that Ms. Weber has discussed this at our last meeting. I'm not calling you Ms. Weber. I'm sorry, Ms. Weiss. Ms. Weber, both of you have brought it up. You both talked about it. Actually, Ms. Weber is the one who gave the update last time, including Ms. Weiss. Was the House Bill 126, which is a revision to the Board of Revision process that could potentially make an impact on our school district. So these are the types of things that we learned about. It was excellent. I felt like I obviously shared all the information that we received with the current board members, just in case you needed a little refresher or some of the current information that's in there. That's really it. It was great, and I appreciate the opportunity to be able to get that onboarding experience.
Thank you, and thank you for sharing the slides. I definitely took a look at them. It's always good to have a little refresher. Need a motion to go into executive session for ORC 121.2G1, employment, dismissal, evaluation, employment compensation, and discipline of a public employee, official or regulated individual, and in accordance with ORC 121.22G8, economic development.
So moved.
Aye. Mr. Balance?
Aye.
Mrs. Bitter? Aye. Dr. Steve?
Aye.
Motion passes. The board will not take any action, so I appreciate everybody's participation today. Thank you very much.